The rain that fell on Ironvale, Oregon that October night was not the kind of rain that apologizes for itself. It was not the soft Pacific mist that tourists photograph against the backdrop of the Cascades and post online with captions about atmosphere and mood. It was the kind that comes in off the coast with its mind already made up, that hits the tin roofs and the cracked sidewalks and the hoods of old pickup trucks like it has a grievance with the town and everybody in it. The kind that makes you feel, if you are standing in it with nowhere to go, that the whole world has turned its back on you at once and done so without discussion. Riley Crane was standing in it. She was 17 years old, 5'5", a worn canvas backpack hanging from one shoulder already dark with water. She had brown eyes that had seen more than brown eyes that age are supposed to see, and she had a way of holding her jaw that her father used to call stubborn and her mother used to call determined. And that was really just the face a person makes when they have decided they are not going to cry, no matter what comes next. She had been making that face for a long time now. The house behind her was a two-story Craftsman on Alcott Street with yellow paint that had needed refreshing for 3 years and a porch light that buzzed when it got wet. The door to that house had just closed, not slammed. Slammed would have been honest. This was worse. This was the soft, deliberate click of a man who has won something and knows it and does not need to make a production of the knowing. The man's name was Grant Holt. He was 49 years old, and he had the kind of face that was pleasant at a distance and cold up close, the kind that smiled at the right moments and never let you see past the smile to whatever was working behind it. He dressed well, even at 11 o'clock on a weeknight in October. He kept his shoes polished. He wore a watch that cost more than the furniture in 3 of the rooms he had moved into when he married Riley's mother 2 years ago. He had stood in the hallway between Riley and the front door with his arms loose at his sides, and he had looked at her the way a man looks at an appointment he has been trying to reschedule for months. He had said, "You have 5 minutes, Riley. Then I call the sheriff and tell him there's a runaway in my house." He used her name the way a man uses a door handle, functional without weight, without the acknowledgement that anything on the other side of it matters. She had not answered him. She had bent down and picked up her backpack from the hallway floor, the one she had packed in 12 minutes between when the argument started and when it became clear that the argument was over and the way things end, when one person has all the power and the other person has a canvas backpack and a transit card and $9 in quarters and singles at the bottom of their jeans pocket. 3 shirts, a hoodie, 1 pair of jeans rolled tight, a toothbrush. Her phone sitting at 11% battery bought with diner money the summer she was 15. And the photograph, the one she never went anywhere without, folded twice tucked inside a paperback copy of a novel her father used to read to her on Sunday mornings when she was small enough to fit in the crook of his arm. The photograph was 8 years old. In it, her father was kneeling beside a workbench in the garage with his hand on her 9-year-old shoulder, and they were both squinting against a bright autumn sun, and they were both smiling the way people smile when they have no idea that the world is about to become a different place entirely. She had looked at her mother before she left. Her mother, Donna Crane, was standing at the kitchen sink. The faucet was running. The dishes were not moving. Her hands rested on the edge of the porcelain like she was holding herself upright against something stronger than gravity. She did not turn around. Her shoulders were up around her ears, and they rose once when Riley said "Mom," a single quiet syllable that was the last word Riley had left to offer, and then they fell again, and the water kept running, and the dishes kept not moving. Riley had walked out the door. She did not look back. She had learned something early in life, something her father had told her once, without meaning it as a lesson. He had said it on a rainy night when she was 6 years old and afraid of the thunder sitting at the foot of her bed and talking to her in that low, calm voice he kept for the dark hours. He had said that the worst things in life were not the storms. The worst things were the days that felt fine on the outside and were rotting on the inside. He had said you can survive a storm. You cannot always survive a quiet kitchen. She had not understood that at 6. She understood it now with her whole body. Alcott Street ran south. South ran toward the old railroad tracks, and the tracks ran toward the part of Ironvale that the lumber money had built, and then abandoned the wide flat stretch of closed mills and empty loading docks and cinder block buildings that the town had stopped maintaining around 2015 and never started again. Nobody walked down there at night unless they had to. Riley Crane had to. The streetlights were old, some of them flickered. Some had given up entirely, leaving long stretches of black wet pavement between circles of yellow light. She passed houses with televisions glowing blue through curtain windows. She passed a dog that barked once from behind a chain-link fence and then went quiet. She passed a man getting into a pickup truck who looked at her for one long second and then looked away because looking away was easier than whatever the alternative was. The rain found the gaps in her hoodie within the first 3 minutes. Her jeans went heavy with water. Her sneakers started making that low sucking sound. Her hair stuck flat to both sides of her face. She did not cry. She had been wanting to cry for 2 years, had been storing up the crying the way you store up sleep debt, a growing weight that pressed behind her eyes and her sternum in the soft place at the back of her throat. But somewhere in the last 2 years, the machinery that made the crying happen had seized up, and now on the night she needed it most, it would not come. What came instead was her father's voice. Not literally. She was not the kind of girl who heard voices, but she knew his voice the way you know a song you have heard 10,000 times, the way it lives in you past the point of memory, past the point of conscious thought, so deep that it is less a thing you remember than a thing you are made of. He used to say that silence was louder than people thought. He used to say you could learn more about a room by listening to it than by looking at it. He used to say a lot of things, her father. And then one February morning when she was 9 years old, the state troopers had come to the door at 6 in the morning with their hats in their hands. And after that, the only place his voice existed was inside her. The troopers had said his pickup truck had gone off the highway on a bend near Route 12, on a stretch where the guardrail had been damaged and never repaired, where the road got treacherous in fog. They said the truck had burned. They said there was not much left. They said it with the practiced sorrow of men who had said this kind of thing before and knew the rhythm of it and the necessary distance it required. Her mother had stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. She had not fallen. People fall in movies when they hear news like that. Her mother had simply stood very still, like a woman who already knew the shape of the thing being described to her and was just waiting for the words to catch up to what her body had already understood. Riley had been 9. She had not known what that stillness meant. She was 17 now. She understood it better. Understanding it did not make it hurt less. She walked for 40 minutes. Her phone died somewhere around the 20-minute mark. She stopped checking it and just walked one foot then the other through the dark and the rain and the steady percussion of water on pavement. The town thinned out. The houses got farther apart. The trees got taller and darker on both sides of the road, old Douglas firs that had been there since before any of these streets existed, and they blocked out whatever thin light the cloud cover might have offered. Then she came around a bend on the edge of the old county road and saw the lights. They were blurred through the rain, yellow and smeared like someone had pressed a thumb against a wet painting. A low cinder block building. 2 pump stations out front with a canopy overhead, most of the canopy lights dead or dying. A hand-painted sign on a post that said Marsh Auto and Fuel in letters that had faded from green to gray. A single window in the office lit dim with a shape moving slowly behind it, in the way that people move at the end of a long shift, when their feet have been on concrete for 9 hours, and their back has been arguing with them since noon. Riley stood at the edge of the lot and let the rain run down the back of her neck. She had not known she was coming here. She had not had a plan. She had just walked south because south was away from Alcott Street, and away from Alcott Street was the only direction that made any sense. But here she was, and here the lot was, and here parked at the far end of the property behind the dumpsters, almost hidden in the dark, was the RV. It was a 1989 motorhome, though she did not know that yet. What she knew right now was that it was big and old and white in the way that things are white, after decades of sun and rain have spent their best efforts on the color, which is to say it was not really white anymore, but something between white and gray and the color of an overcast sky. Rust had worked its way up the wheel wells and along the lower panels in long, irregular streaks. One window on the side had a crack running through it repaired with 2 strips of duct tape that had been there long enough to curl at the edges. The tires looked like they felt, which was tired. The whole machine had the particular quality of something that had stopped going anywhere a long time ago and had made its peace with staying. Taped to the driver's side door, protected from the rain by a plastic sleeve, was a piece of torn cardboard. The handwriting on it was large and slightly uneven, the writing of a man whose hands were better suited to wrenches than to pens. For sale. Run sometimes. $10. Riley read it twice. Then she laughed. It came out of her sudden and brief, a short, wet, miserable sound that surprised even her. The kind of laugh that arrives not because anything is funny, but because the human body needs some form of release. And this was what her body had available at this particular moment in the rain, at the end of the worst night of her life so far. A motorhome for $10. She had 9. She walked toward it the way you approach something you are afraid might disappear if it notices you looking. She put her hand on the side of it. The metal was cold and patient and wet, and it did not move away from her. It did not tell her to leave. It just stood there in the rain. And for the first time that night, something in the world was not actively rejecting her. The voice came from behind her. "You look lost, miss." She turned around slowly. The man who had come out from the side door of the service bay was somewhere in his early 60s, though he wore those years the way men wear years, who have spent them doing physical work, which is to say he was thick through the shoulders and chest in a way that had nothing to do with a gym and everything to do with decades of real labor. Not tall, but solid. Wide hands, forearms built for lifting, a belly that pushed gently against a work shirt that had been washed enough times to go soft. White hair under a faded green cap with the name of a tractor company stitched across the front. A beard going gray at the jaw. Eyes that were tired and kind and watching her with an attention that was not threatening, but was not casual either. He was wearing a canvas jacket. Rain ran off the brim of his cap in a thin, steady curtain in front of his face. He did not seem bothered by it. "How much do you have, miss?" he said. She wiped water from her eyes. She pointed at the cardboard sign. "It says 10. "I know what it says." He took one step closer, hands loose at his sides. He looked at the RV the way a man looks at an old dog he cannot bring himself to put down. Then he looked at her. His eyes moved to the backpack on her shoulder. Then to the front pocket of the backpack where the corner of a photograph was visible getting wet. He held there for a moment that was just slightly longer than a glance, and something moved behind his eyes that she could not read. "How much do you have, miss?" He said it again, not as a question, but as a patient restatement, like a man who already knew the answer and was giving her the space to say it herself. She reached into her pocket. She did not know why she was telling the truth. She could have said 10, but there was something in the steadiness of his eyes that made lying feel like the wrong instrument for this particular moment. 9, she said. She held out the money. A crumpled 5-3 folded singles, 4/4 a dime. The full accounting of her existence at this point in time. He looked at it. He looked at her face. He looked at the photograph in her pocket again, just the corner of it, the sliver where a man's arm was visible, a hand on a child's shoulder. Something settled in his expression. Something quiet and private, like a door opening 1 inch and then steadying itself. 9 will do, he said. He held out his hand. She put the money in it. He did not count it. He folded the bills around the coins and put the whole small wet wad of her life into the front pocket of his jacket. Then he reached into the other pocket and produced a key ring. 2 keys, one large and silver, one small and brass with a notch missing from the head, worn smooth from years of use. He held them in his palm without giving them to her yet. "Miss," he said, "there's something I need to tell you about this RV before I hand you these keys." She waited. The rain kept falling. Inside that motorhome, he said, there is a door. At the back. End of the hallway past the overhead bunk. Metal door. Painted gray. It's locked. She looked at him. "What's behind it?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the RV, then at the rain, then at the photograph again. "I don't know," he said. "You don't know." "No, miss. You own this RV and you don't know what's behind a door inside it." "That's right." "Why?" He worked his jaw slowly. The motion of a man who is about to say something he has been holding inside for a very long time and is not certain how it will come out. "Because it was never my door to open," he said, "and it was never my door to ask about. But it might be yours. That's something you'll have to decide for yourself." His name, he told her, was Owen Marsh. The station was his. It had been his father's before that. He had run it for 30 years. She told him her name. He nodded once, the kind of nod that contains more information than it appears to. Then he extended his hand with the keys in it, and she took them, and they were warm from his jacket pocket and heavier than 2 keys had any right to be. "Take care of yourself in there," he said. "Propane tank is full. Battery is weak, but it'll run the lights for a few hours. There's a water tank under the sink. Don't drink from it. There are water bottles in the cabinet above the stove. I put fresh ones in last week. She looked at him steadily. You put fresh water in last week? Yes, miss. Why? He did not answer that. He touched the brim of his cap, turned, and walked back toward the lit office of the station, slow the way men walk in the rain when they have nowhere urgent to be. When he reached the door, he paused and looked back at her one time. His face was a pale smudge under the brim of his cap in the dark. He did not wave. Then he went inside, and a small bell above the door tinkled, once dry and all that wet, and the door closed behind him. Riley stood alone in the lot. She turned back to the RV. She fit the silver key into the lock. It turned smoothly, too smoothly for a vehicle this old, which meant someone had oiled it recently. The handle gave with a clean click. The door swung outward. She climbed in. The smell hit her first. Old fabric, settled dust, the faint, sweet ghost of pine air freshener that had surrendered its fragrance sometime in the previous decade. And underneath all of that, something else she could not name exactly, the smell of something that had been waiting. Of a space kept ready for a purpose without quite knowing yet what that purpose was. But it was dry inside. That was the second thing. Dry and still and cut off from the wind and the rain that hammered the metal roof above her head. The drumming of the rain on the roof was the same rain that had been soaking through her clothes for the past 40 minutes. But heard from inside, it became something different. It became a sound you could think alongside instead of against. She closed the door. She turned the lock. The lock made a solid, satisfying sound. For the first time in 4 hours, Riley Crane was inside a place where no one was going to tell her to leave. She stood in the entryway and let her eyes adjust. The cabin was small. A driver's seat and passenger seat up front, both vinyl cracked with age. A dinette with a fold-down table and 2 bench seats in faded plaid. A kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, a small sink, a cabinet above it. A narrow hallway past the kitchen. And at the end of that hallway, visible even from here, a door. Metal. Painted gray. Exactly where Owen Marsh had said it would be. She did not go to it. Not yet. She peeled her wet hoodie off and hung it over the passenger seat. She found a hand towel in a drawer beneath the sink, clean enough, and dried her face and hair. She opened one of the water bottles above the stove and drank half of it standing up, and the water was cold and clean and tasted like nothing at all, which was the best thing she had tasted in days. She sat down on the bench seat of the dinette. She pulled the photograph out of the front pocket of her backpack. Her father's face looked up at her, a little water-stained at one corner now, but intact. He was kneeling. His hand was on her 9-year-old shoulder. They were both squinting in the autumn light and smiling like people who do not know yet what is coming. "Hey, Dad," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she expected in the small space. "I bought a motorhome." The rain kept drumming on the roof. She set the photograph face up on the table beside her. She reached back into the backpack and pulled out her father's paperback, the one she carried everywhere, the one with his handwriting in the margins, and the creased spine from years of being read and folded shut and read again. She set that on the table too. Then she started cleaning. She had not planned it a clean, but there is something about taking up physical residence in a space that requires the hands to be busy while the mind processes what it cannot yet process directly. She opened the cabinets one by one and cleared them out, wiped them down, put things back in order. She found old newspapers in the cabinet by the door, all dated years ago. She found a screwdriver. She found a flashlight that worked when she shook it. She found a first aid kit, older than she was still sealed. And then in the very back of the cabinet above the stove, tucked behind a box of crackers, so old they had become a geological sample, she found something else. A metal box. Small. About the size of a paperback book. Gray like the door at the end of the hallway. Not rusted, just dusty. Pushed all the way to the back of the shelf in the way that things are placed when someone wants them found by the right person and not found by anyone else. She pulled it out. The lid was stuck. Not locked, just bonded to the rim by years of pressure and time. She worked at it with the screwdriver. It took 3 minutes. The lid finally released with a small dry crack like a knuckle popping cleanly. Inside was a stack of papers, folded, tied with a piece of old cotton twine. Neat, deliberate. Organized the way a man organizes papers when he needs them to survive without him. She untied the twine. The papers were old. Some were photocopies. Some were handwritten on lined paper. Some had official letterheads from organizations she did not recognize. Most had dates. The dates ran across a span of 7 or 8 years, ending in late 2017. She started reading. She did not understand most of what she was looking at. Technical specifications with strings of numbers she had no framework for. Memos written in language so dense with industry terminology that the sentences barely parsed as English. References to projects with code names to systems, components, to regulatory classifications she had never encountered. But on the third page near the top in a row of typed personnel information, there was a name, Eli Warwick. Riley went completely still. She read it again and again. Her eyes moved over the letters the way you move over something you think you might be misreading that your brain is translating incorrectly out of some failure of context or attention. Eli Warwick. That was her father's name. She turned the page. The same name. She turned it again and again. Memo after memo, report after report, form after form. All of them bearing his name, some of them bearing his signature. The signature she would have known anywhere because she had spent years after his death tracing it on the backs of envelopes, in the corners of homework pages, the looping E, the clean W, the slight upward angle on the lowercase t. She stopped on a page near the middle of the stack. It was a personnel summary. There was a small black and white photograph in the upper right corner. Her father. Younger than she remembered him, maybe 35, in a collared shirt, looking at the camera with the expression of a man who does not especially enjoy having his photograph taken. Underneath the photograph was his name. Underneath the name was a title, Chief Systems Engineer, and under that, in smaller type, Vantage Defense Solutions Incorporated Restricted Access Division. Riley set the page down on the dinette. Her mother had told her that Eli Warwick was a mechanic. That was what she had always said. What was written in the short obituary notice in the local paper. Eli Warwick, 38. Mechanic, survived by his wife Donna and his daughter Riley. Beloved. Gone too soon. A mechanic. Riley looked at the title again. Chief Systems Engineer. Restricted Access Division. She understood the words individually. Together they assembled into something that her mind kept sliding off, that refused to hold its shape, that kept reforming into the simpler, flatter version of her father that she had been handed at 9 years old and had been carrying ever since. Her mother had lied to her. For 8 years. For all of it. She did not slam the papers down. She sat very still, the way her father used to sit when he was thinking about something hard, with his hands flat on the table and his eyes focused on nothing in particular. And she let the information settle into her, the way cold water settles slow and heavy, finding all the available space. At the bottom of the stack, written in the margins of the last page in her father's careful hand, 4 words, "This is not defense." And below that, Sayer knows. Sayer approved. She picked up her phone. It was almost dead. She had charged it for 12 minutes at an outlet earlier and had about 10% remaining. Enough for one call. She dialed home. It rang 4 times. A man answered. Not her mother. Grant Holt. His voice was smooth and even, the voice of a man who had been expecting the call and decided in advance how to handle it. Riley, he said, her name in his mouth like a coin he was examining for authenticity. I want to talk to my mother. Your mother is resting. She's been very upset since you left. Put her on the phone. A pause. The sound of a movement, a door opening, another closing. When Grant spoke again, his voice had dropped half a register quieter, the way a voice goes when a man has moved somewhere private. Listen to me carefully, he said. She listened. I don't know where you are. I don't care where you are. You wanted to leave, you left. That's a closed matter. But I'm going to tell you this one time and I won't repeat it. Whatever you think you found, wherever you are, whatever you think you're going to do with it, stop. Stop now. Before something happens that no one can fix. Her hand tightened on the phone. What do you mean, whatever I found? His voice went quieter still, almost gentle in the way that certain very dangerous things are gentle. If I see your face in this town again, he said, if I hear your name in my house again, if I find out you've gone to anyone, your mother is going to have an accident, Riley. The kind of accident that runs in your family. The line went dead. Riley sat with the phone in her hand for a long moment. The screen was dark. The rain kept drumming on the roof. The personnel summary was still on the table in front of her, her father's face looking up from the small photograph in the corner. She looked at it. She thought about the phrase Grant had used. Whatever you think you found. Not whatever you found. Whatever you think you found. The grammar of a man who had been waiting for this moment and had his words ready. The grammar of a man who knew exactly what she had in her hands. She picked up the personnel summary. She held it under the small overhead light. She read the title again. She read the project name Iron Gate, which appeared on 3 of the subsequent pages in bold type, as though it were the kind of word that needed to be contained. She thought about her mother at the kitchen sink. She thought about the troopers at the door at 6 in the morning, hats in their hands and her mother's stillness, the hand over the mouth, the knees that did not buckle, the stillness of a woman who already knows. She set the papers down and looked at the door at the end of the hallway. The gray metal door, locked, patient, waiting in the dark the way certain things wait, without urgency, without anxiety, as if they have always known that eventually the right person would arrive. Her father's voice in the marrow of her. You never met a door you didn't want to open. He used to say that with fond exasperation. He used to say it was going to get her into trouble one day. She looked at the door. She thought today might be the day, but not tonight. Tonight she was tired in a way that went past the bones into the soft center of her, where everything important lived. Tonight she had walked out of a house that had stopped being hers and into a motorhome that was. The door would still be there in the morning. The truth behind it had already waited 8 years. It could wait until she had slept. She folded the papers carefully, retied them with the twine, and put them in the bottom of her backpack underneath the spare shirt underneath the paperback. She zipped it closed and set it against the wall where she could feel it against her leg if she shifted in her sleep. She found a blanket in the overhead compartment, folded, smelling of cedar. She spread it over herself on the bench seat and balled up her dry hoodie under her head as a pillow. The plaid upholstery was scratchy against her cheek. The rain on the roof found a rhythm and held it. She switched off the small light above the dinette. The darkness came down around her, warm and private and entirely hers. For a long time she lay still and listened to the rain. She thought about her father. She thought about the photograph on the table, his hand on her shoulder, both of them squinting in that long-ago autumn sun. She thought about the words on the personnel summary. Chief Systems Engineer, Restricted Access Division. Words her mother had never said. Words the obituary had not contained. Words her father had built a life around, and then built something else around when that life became too dangerous to keep. She thought about a 9-year-old girl and a door. She thought, whatever is behind it, Dad, I'm going to find out. She fell asleep somewhere around midnight, with the rain still coming down on the roof, and the gray door at the end of the hallway waiting for her in the dark, patient, and locked and full of a truth that had survived 8 years of waiting and was in no particular hurry now. Morning came the way mornings come after nights like that one, gradually, without enthusiasm. The light arriving not so much as light, but as a slow withdrawal of darkness. Gray becoming less gray by degrees, until the world outside the cracked and duct-taped window of the motorhome was recognizable again as Oregon in October. Wet pavement, wet firs, a sky the color of old pewter stretched flat from one ridge to the other. Riley was awake before the light finished arriving. She had not slept well. She had slept, which was something more than she had expected. But the sleep had been thin and populated with the remnants of things she could not hold on to. When she opened her eyes, her father's voice somewhere in the middle distance saying something she could not quite reach. The words dissolving the moment her consciousness tried to close around them. What stayed was not the content of the dream, but the feeling of it. The feeling that someone had been trying very hard to tell her something important across a distance that was just slightly too far. She sat up on the bench seat. The cabin was cold, the propane heat she had not figured out how to run, leaving the air with a bite that smelled of damp upholstery and old metal. She found the water bottle she had not finished the night before, and drank the rest of it, standing at the kitchenette window, looking out at the lot. Owen Marsh's station was already open. The forecourt lights were on. Through the office window she could see the shape of him moving slow and deliberate, the unhurried movement of a man who has been starting his day the same way for 30 years and sees no reason to rush any part of it. She watched him for a moment. He had put fresh water in the cabinet last week, he had said. Why would a man put fresh water in a motorhome he was trying to sell? Why had he oiled the lock? Why had he looked at the photograph in her pocket the way he had with that brief stillness, that fractional pause that was too controlled to be casual and too private to be explained? She did not have answers yet, but she filed them in the place where she kept things that needed answers, a place she had been building since she was 9 years old, and the troopers stood at the door with their hats in their hands, and nothing they said had quite added up. She braided her hair back. She put on her cleanest shirt, her hoodie over it. She put the photograph in the inside pocket of the hoodie against her chest, where she could feel the small square shape of it when she breathed. She left the backpack on the dinette tucked beneath the bench seat cushion. She took only her keys and the $8 in change remaining after the night before, enough for coffee and not much more. She walked into town. Ironvale in the early morning was a town going through the motions of being a town. The Main Street storefronts were occupied in the way that the word occupied does not quite mean the same thing as thriving. A hardware store, a pharmacy, a cell phone, repair place, a barber shop with a sign that said open but no cars out front. The diner on the corner of Main and 2nd had been there for 40 years. It had a hand-painted sign in the window that said Blue Anchor, and the smell coming through the gap under the door was the smell of coffee and bacon, and something baking in the back, and it hit Riley in the chest before she even had her hand on the door handle. She pushed it open. A small bell tinkled overhead. The Blue Anchor diner was narrow and warm, and lit with the kind of light that makes everything look slightly better than it is. 8 booths along the left wall, a counter running the right side with 8 stools, 4 of them occupied, a pass-through to the kitchen in the back, photographs on the walls of Ironvale across the decades, the mills when they were running the high school teams from various years, a framed newspaper front page from 1962. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was somewhere in her early 60s with a round face and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and gray hair pulled back in a bun that had probably started the morning neat and was working its way toward loosening. She was wearing a blue apron over a plaid shirt, and her hands were dusted with flour. She had the kind of face that made you feel in the first 3 seconds of looking at it that whatever you had been carrying when you walked through that door was something she had seen before and was not frightened of. She looked at Riley. She took in the wet sneakers, the backpack strap, the hollow place behind Riley's eyes that a night of thin sleep in a cold motor home will put there. She did not ask any questions. She said, "Sit down, honey." Riley sat at the counter. The woman set a glass of water in front of her. Then a coffee mug already filled 2 small creamers beside it. Then, without being asked, a plate. Scrambled eggs, bacon 4 strips, 2 pieces of toast with butter going translucent in the heat, a small dish of sliced orange on the side. Riley looked at the plate. She looked up. "I have $8, she said. The woman waved her hand in the way you wave off something that does not require discussing right now. Her name tag said Bet. "Eat first," Bet said. "We'll sort the rest after." Riley ate. She ate slowly at first with the self-consciousness of someone who is aware of being watched and does not want to reveal how hungry she is. Then she stopped being self-conscious and just ate the way a person eats when a real meal is the first real meal in longer than it should have been. Betty moved up and down the counter, refilling coffee for the men at the far end, ringing up a to-go bag for a man in a work vest, wiping down the section beside the register. She moved the way a woman moves in a space she has run long enough that the space has become an extension of her body, every turn and reach accomplished without thought. When the plate was empty, Bet came back and set down a slice of apple pie, a thin slice. "Compliments of the house," she said. Riley looked up at her. "Why are you being kind to me?" She had not planned to say it that directly, but it came out that way, and she left it. Bet leaned both elbows on the counter. She was quiet for a moment in the way of a woman who knows the answer to a question and is deciding how much of it to give. "Because you walked in here looking like the world threw you out," she said. "And I have a rule in this diner. The world doesn't get to throw a person out twice." She reached across the counter and touched Riley's wrist. Just the backs of 2 fingers against the knob of bone brief, like she was checking something. "You staying somewhere safe, honey. I have a place. Is it warm? It's dry. Is it yours?" Riley thought about the keys in her pocket. She thought about the door she had locked from the inside. "It is now," she said. Bet nodded, the slow nod of a woman who has heard a lot of answers and can tell the real ones from the performing ones. She refilled Riley's coffee. Then she put both hands flat on the counter and looked at her with the directness of a woman who has spent 40 years reading people across a diner counter. "You come back tomorrow morning," she said. "I open at 5, you come in at 7. I'll feed you breakfast. And if you want to wash dishes on weekends, I pay 12 an hour cash." Riley's throat did something it had not done in a long while. She made it stop. "Yes, Bet," she said. Bet straightened up and went back to the coffee pot. That was the end of that particular exchange, which was exactly right, because any more of it would have been too much for both of them. Riley left $4 on the counter, which was not what the food was worth, and Bet did not say anything about it, which meant they had reached an understanding. On the way out, Bet pressed a paper bag into her hand without comment. Inside was a roast beef sandwich, a banana, and a small bag of crackers. She walked. The question she had been organizing since she woke up was this: who was her father? Not emotionally. She knew who her father was in the ways that mattered most. The hand on the shoulder in the photograph, the low voice in the dark during thunderstorms, the paperback with his handwriting in the margins, the man who had given her his too big denim jacket on a day she could not quite remember anymore, but that had felt in the photograph like happiness distilled into an afternoon. She knew all of that. That was not what she was asking. What she was asking was, who was Eli Warwick? Chief Systems Engineer, Restricted Access Division, Vantage Defense Solutions, Project Iron Gate. Those words did not belong to the man she had been told about. They belonged to someone who had lived in the same body, in the same house, in the same garage as her father, but who had also gone to a building that required restricted access and built things classified enough to have a name instead of a description, and had known a man named Cole Sayer well enough to write that name in a document's margin with the words, "Sayer knows, Sayer approved." She went back to the Blue Anchor at lunchtime when the counter had cleared enough that Betty had a moment. She sat at the same stool and waited until Betty had settled into the lean against the counter. That meant she had a few minutes. Riley said, "Can I ask you something?" Betty said, "You can ask me anything, honey." Riley said, "Do you know a company called Vantage Defense Solutions?" The change in Bet's face was small enough that most people would have missed it entirely. A slight tightening at the corner of her mouth, a flick of her eyes toward the far booth, checking to see if anyone was listening. No one was. Bet leaned forward. "Why are you asking?" "Because I think my father worked for them, and I think they had something to do with how he died." Bet was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached under the counter for the stool she kept there and sat down on it, slow the way a woman sits when the conversation that is about to happen is not a standing up kind of conversation. "Your father," she said. "What was his name?" "Eli Warwick." Bet closed her eyes. Just for a second. When she opened them, they were wet at the corners, and she made no move to conceal that. "He came in here every Tuesday morning for 9 years," she said. "Black coffee, eggs over easy. He liked his toast dark. He always brought the sports section back to the counter so I could see how the high school teams were doing. He left a $5 tip on a $6 breakfast every single time." She paused and her voice went somewhere quieter. "About 2 months before he died, she said he came in on a Tuesday and he didn't eat. He just sat in that corner booth and stared out the window. I went over to check on him. He looked at me the way a man looks when he has made a decision he wishes he did not have to make. He said, 'Bet, if anything ever happens to me, I need you to remember a name.'" Riley did not move. "He told me the name Bet said. He said if his girl ever came in here, if a young woman ever came in asking about him or about Vantage Defense, I should tell her that name. I told him he was scaring me. He said good. He paid his bill and walked out. 2 months later, they told us he was dead on Route 12. She reached across and covered Riley's hand with hers. Her hand was warm and flour-dusted and old in the soft way that hands get when they have worked hard for a long time and have touched many things that mattered. "The name he gave me," Bet said, "was Cole Sayer." Riley sat very still. "He knew," she said. "He knew something was coming," Bet said. "He was trying to make sure it didn't die with him." Riley looked down at Bet's hand over hers. She thought about a man sitting in a corner booth, unable to eat his eggs over easy, staring out a diner window at a gray Oregon morning, deciding what to leave behind and who to trust with it. She said, "Is there anyone who might know more about what he was working on? About what Vantage was doing?" Bet reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small order pad and a stub of pencil. She wrote a name and an address and folded the paper and slid it across the counter. There's a man named Frank Dolan, she said. He worked the regional news beat for 30 years, retired 5 years ago. He lives out past the boat launch on Lake Lakemore, a little cabin at the end of a gravel road. He'll be home. He's always home. Tell him Bet Tanner sent you. Tell him it's about Eli. He'll know what that means. Riley pocketed the paper. Bet, she said. Why didn't you go to someone after he died if you had a name? Bet looked at her steadily. Because the people who run Vantage Defense are not the kind of people who let things go when you start pulling at them, sweetheart. I am a woman who runs a diner. I have 11 employees and a lease in a building older than I am. I knew the name. I kept the name. I waited for the right person to walk through that door and ask for it. She paused. 37 years in this business, and I have learned one thing above all else. The right person always walks through the door eventually. You just have to still be here when they do. She stood up from the stool and went back to the coffee pot. Frank Dolan's cabin was 11 miles north of town on a gravel road that ran along the south shore of Lake Lakemore. Riley walked the whole way. She had her legs and 2 hours of daylight and Bet's note in her pocket, and she walked. The road ran through stands of second-growth fir and cedar trees close enough on both sides to make the afternoon feel later than it was. She ate the sandwich Bet had packed while she walked, barely tasting it, her mind already arranging and rearranging the things she knew, and the spaces between them where the things she did not know lived. The cabin sat on a slight rise above the lake. Cedar shingles gone gray with age. A wood stove pipe poking through the roof with a thin thread of smoke curling from it. A porch with 2 rocking chairs. A dog the color of dirty snow lying on the porch boards. The dog lifted its head and watched Riley come up the drive with the calm assessment of an animal that stopped being impressed by strangers a long time ago. The man in the second rocking chair lowered a coffee cup. He was in his late 60s, lean and long-limbed even sitting down. White hair cropped short. A face that had spent most of its life in outdoor weather, deeply lined with a set to the jaw that spoke of a man accustomed to being patient. Half-moon glasses perched low on his nose. A flannel shirt buttoned all the way to the collar. He was holding a paperback book, his place marked with one finger. He looked at Riley over the top of the glasses, with eyes that were sharp in the way that eyes get when a person has spent decades paying close attention to the world and has not stopped. I'm looking for Frank Dolan, Riley said. He set the book face down on the arm of his chair. Something had shifted in his posture when she came up the drive, a barely perceptible straightening, like a man recognizing a frequency he has been tuned to hear. You found him, he said. My name is Riley Crane. Eli Warwick was my father. Frank Dolan did not move for a moment. His eyes held on her face with the quality of a man locating something he was told might eventually arrive. Then he set his coffee cup down on the porch railing with the deliberate care of someone who does not want to spill it. Bet send you, he said. Yes, sir. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he stood unfolding himself from the chair in the unhurried way of a tall man whose joints require a moment of negotiation. Come up on the porch, Miss Crane, he said. Mind the third step. Board's been loose 2 winters and I keep meaning to fix it. She came up. She avoided the third step. She sat in the chair he indicated, the one with a folded American flag draped over the back, and let it rest against her shoulder and did not move it. Frank settled back into his rocker. He looked out at the lake, which was flat and gray, and still the surface, the color of polished pewter under the afternoon sky. A loon called somewhere out past the far reeds, its voice carrying across the water with the particular clarity of a sound in a large empty space. How old are you, Miss Crane? He said. 17. You look like him. Around the eyes. People used to say that. They were right. He drank from his cup, set it down, looked at the lake. Your father came to me in the spring of 2017, he said. He said he had a story. He said it was a big story. The kind of story a man like me spends his whole career hoping someone will bring him and usually never does. He gave me 3 months of his time. Documents, interviews, names. I started writing it. I had it about half finished when August happened. What happened in August? He stopped coming, Frank said. He missed a meeting. Then 2 more. His number was disconnected. The story went cold. And then the following February, his truck turned up burned on Route 12, and the county said he was dead. He paused. That was 6 months after he stopped coming to me. Riley said, Where was he for those 6 months? Frank looked out at the lake. The loon called again. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Miss Crane, he said finally, I'm going to tell you something I have never put in print and never will. I want you to understand that before I say it. She waited. There was no body in that car. The words landed in the cold porch air the way a stone lands in still water, immediate and then spreading. She said, what? The accident on Route 12, he said. The fire, the burned truck on the bend. There was no body recovered. Not a complete one. Not enough to identify by anything except a wallet and a watch. The medical examiner who signed the death certificate was a man named Bert Halverson. He had been on retainer with Vantage Defense Solutions for 11 years. He died of a stroke in 2021 without ever giving a public statement about the case. The certificate he signed listed cause of death as blunt force trauma and burn injuries consistent with a vehicle accident. No autopsy was requested. By my mother, Riley said. By your mother, Frank confirmed, who at that time was a woman who had been told her husband was dead, who had a 9-year-old daughter, and who may or may not have been in any condition to request anything at all. I don't know what your mother knew or didn't know. I never asked her. I am asking you to think about it now. Riley sat with it. The dog on the porch sighed and shifted and laid its chin back on its paws. She said, Are you telling me my father might not have been in that truck? Frank turned his head and looked at her directly. His eyes behind the half-moon glasses were steady and careful. I'm telling you that I don't know what happened to your father between August of 2017 and February of 2018, he said. I have a theory. I've had it for 8 years. I haven't been able to prove it. I am too old and too retired to be the one to prove it. But you asked what I know, and what I know is that there was no body in that car. She said, What is your theory? He picked up his coffee cup. Put it down again. My theory, he said, is that your father knew he was in danger. He knew it because of what he had brought to me. He knew that the people he was crossing did not allow people to walk away from what he was about to do. So in the late summer of 2017, he stopped working with me, stopped working with everyone, and disappeared. He arranged for a truck to go off a road and burn on a foggy February morning, and he left behind a wallet and a watch, and he walked away. So he was alive, Riley said. Frank shook his head. That is not what I said. She waited. I said he disappeared in August, Frank said. The truck was found in February. 6 months passed. 6 months in which a man like Cole Sayer, who does not lose things, would have been looking for your father with everything he had. I believe your father got away in August of 2017. I do not believe he stayed away forever. I think they found him. I think they found him in January or February of 2018. And I think they used the truck on Route 12 to close the story. The story was already half written by me, so they finished it for him. The lake was very still. The smoke from the wood stove curled up into the gray afternoon sky and disappeared. Riley said he gave himself up to protect us. That's one way to say it. He disappeared, and they found him and he died so they would stop looking at my mother and me. Frank did not answer directly. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has just put a hard thing into words for the first time and is watching to see if they can hold the weight of it. I believe that is what happened, he said. Yes. She looked out at the lake. The loon called a third time farther away. Now its voice threading through the fog beginning to settle on the far shore. She said, I found papers in a motorhome, documents from Vantage Defense. His name is on all of them, his signature, and the project name, Irongate. Frank's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it back down without drinking. Irongate, he said. You know it. I know it. It's what he brought to me in 2017. It's what the story was about. He looked at her steadily. Where are these documents now? Somewhere safe. Not here. Good. He leaned forward slightly. Miss Crane, do not carry those documents on your person. Do not photograph them on your phone. Do not send them in any message or email. Do not tell anyone where they are. Do you understand? Yes. He sat back. He looked at the lake for a moment. The fact that you have those papers, he said, means your father wanted you to have them. The fact that he wanted you to have them means he had a plan. And the fact that he had a plan means there is something more, something beyond the papers. The papers are a map, Miss Crane, not the destination. Do you understand the difference? I think so. He looked at her carefully. Where did you find them? She said, in a motorhome. I bought it last night. From a man at the station south of town. Marsh Auto and Fuel. A man named Owen Marsh. The silence on the porch became a different kind of silence. Frank Dolan set his coffee cup down very carefully on the porch railing. He removed his glasses. He folded them and placed them in his shirt pocket. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize, complex and layered in the way that old grief and old knowledge are complex when they surface together after years of being kept separate. Miss Crane, he said, what I'm about to tell you is the last thing I'm going to tell you today. After this, I'm going to send you back to town, and I'm going to ask you not to come back here for a while. If I'm right about what is happening, we should not be seen together more than once. She waited. Owen Marsh, Frank said slowly, was your father's closest friend. Riley's mouth opened. They went to Oregon State together. Class of 1998. Marsh left in his senior year to come back and take over the family station when his father's health went. Your father finished his degree, went on to Vantage Defense, but they stayed close all those years. Marsh used to come for dinner. Your father used to take you fishing at Marsh's family cabin when you were 5 or 6 years old. Riley stared at him. I don't remember any of that. You were very young. After your father died, Marsh stopped coming around. Your mother had remarried. People said he had drifted, that things were different without Eli. She paused. That is what people said. And what really happened, Frank was quiet for a moment. I don't know for certain, he said, but I will tell you this. The man who sold you a motorhome for $9 last night with a locked door inside it and fresh water in the cabinet is not a stranger. He is the closest thing your father had to a brother. And I do not believe in coincidences. Not in cases like this one. Riley stood. Her legs did it before her mind fully caught up. I have to go back and talk to him, she said. Sit down, Miss Crane. She sat. You will go back, Frank said. But you will walk. You will eat whatever Bet packed on the way. You will think. You will not run in there and demand answers. You will let Owen Marsh tell you what he knows in his own time. If he tells you, you will know he has been waiting for this exact moment. If he denies it or deflects, you will know something is wrong. A man who has kept a secret for 9 years will know when the time has come to let it go. Give him the chance to let it go. She said, why didn't he just tell me last night? Frank looked at her with great steadiness. Because your father told him not to, he said. I would bet everything I have left on that. Your father left him one instruction. Wait. Don't tell her. Let her find it herself. Because if she finds it on her own, she'll trust it. If someone hands it to her, she'll always wonder. Riley sat with that. The smoke kept curling. The dog exhaled through its nose. The lake was very still. She said, there's a locked door at the back of the motorhome. Owen told me about it that first night. He said he didn't know what was behind it. Frank nodded once slow. I think he was telling the truth about that, he said. Your father was very careful about what he gave to which person. Owen got the motorhome. Owen got the instructions to wait. The door, I suspect, was always meant for someone else entirely. He looked at her over the folded glasses in his shirt pocket. It was meant for you, Miss Crane. She walked back to town with the sandwich in her hand and did not taste it. Her mind kept circling the same set of facts her father, 9 years Owen Marsh. The door, the papers in her backpack, the recording that might exist if the door held what Frank's silence seemed to imply it held. Sayer knows. Sayer approved. She knew what she was going to do. She had known it since sitting on Frank's porch and hearing the word Iron Gate come out of a retired journalist's mouth with the weight of a thing he had been carrying for years. She was going to go back to the motorhome. She was going to open the door. Not because Frank had told her to, because her father had put a plan in motion 9 years ago and had aimed it at her specifically, and she was not in the habit of letting her father down, even when he was 8 years gone. She went back to the station. Owen was in his service bay, same folding chair, same thermos cup. The broad-shouldered stillness of a man who has spent years watching a road and has learned to be comfortable with the watching. She walked across the lot and stopped 6 feet from him. She could smell motor oil and old concrete and the cold of a metal building at the end of a working day. She said, you knew my father. He looked at her, not with surprise, with something closer to relief, the look of a man who has been holding something a very long time and has finally been given permission to set it down. He said, "Yes, I did. You were his friend. I was. You've been sitting on this motorhome for 9 years. Yes, miss. Waiting for me. Yes, miss." She said, "Why didn't you tell me last night?" He set the thermos down on the concrete floor beside his chair. He looked at his hands for a moment, large scarred hands that had spent decades in conversation with engines. "Your father left me one set of instructions," he said. "He gave them to me on a Friday afternoon in July of 2017. He came and sat in this bay and drank a beer with me, and he looked at me the way he looked when he had thought something all the way through and come to the end of the thinking. He said, 'Owen, if anything happens to me, I need you to do three things. Keep the motor home running, keep the door at the back locked, and wait.'" "And you did," Riley said. "I did. For 9 years. For 9 years." She said he knew. In July of 2017, he already knew what was coming. He knew they were watching him, Owen said. He knew it was a matter of time. And he knew that if he ran, they would come after the people closest to him. So he did what he could with the time he had left. He made arrangements. He put things in place. He said Owen stopped. He worked his jaw slowly. He said, "When she comes, don't tell her. Let her find it. She's mine. She'll find it. And if she finds it on her own, she'll trust it. If you hand it to her, she'll always wonder." Riley stood in the open bay of the old gas station with the cold October air on her shoulders. She thought about a man in July of 2017 sitting in this same bay drinking a beer with his best friend, knowing he was running out of time and making the most deliberate use he could of what he had left. The motorhome sitting in the dark behind the dumpsters for 9 years maintained and ready waiting for her. She said, "Owen, the price. Why $9? He looked up at her. His eyes were wet. He made no move to conceal it. "He told me the price that same afternoon," Owen said. "He said when she comes, the price is 9. Not 8, not 10. 9. He said she will be the same girl she was when I left her on the inside. And that is the girl I need to walk through that door." Something broke open in Riley Crane's chest that had been sealed for 8 years. She put her hands over her face. She stood in the service bay of Owen Marsh's gas station, and she cried. Not the thin, frustrated crying of someone who has been unable to cry. Real crying, the deep, shaking kind that comes from a place below language that has nothing to do with dignity or the careful management of how you appear to the world. The crying of a daughter for a father who had loved her enough to plan for her across 9 years of absence, who had set the price at 9 because she was 9 when he left, and he needed her to know that in his mind she had not changed by a single day, that she was still his. Owen Marsh did not get up from his chair. He did not come to her. He sat in his folding metal chair with his hands on his knees, and he waited still in the way of a man who has always understood that some things cannot be hurried, and that the most important thing he could offer right now was simply to remain. When she could breathe again, she lowered her hands. She said, "There's a door at the end of the hallway." Owen looked at her. "Yes, miss," he said. "There is." She said, "Tonight I'm going to open it." He nodded once. Slow. "Yes, miss," he said. "I believe you are." He told her there was a crowbar in the toolbox by the hydraulic lift. He told her the battery would run the interior lights for a few hours. He told her he would sit in his chair and watch the road, and that if anyone came who should not come, he would know it before they reached the lot. She crossed to the toolbox. She lifted the lid. The crowbar was there, black steel, heavy and cold. She picked it up. She turned back to him one last time. She said, "Owen, he set the price at 9 because I was 9. Yes, miss. Not because the motorhome was worth 9. Owen shook his head slowly. "Not because of that, no," he said. She stood there with the crowbar heavy in her hand. She thought about what it meant to be the destination of a plan that had traveled 9 years to reach you. She thought about the locked door. She thought about her father's face in the photograph, the squinting autumn eyes, the hand on her shoulder, the smile that had no idea what was coming. She turned and walked across the lot toward the motorhome. The station lights fell yellow behind her. Her shadow stretched long across the wet pavement all the way to the door of the RV. She climbed the 2 steps. She fit the silver key into the lock. She went in. The crowbar was heavy in her hand. The hallway was narrow and dark. The gray metal door waited at the end of it with the patience of something that has never been in a hurry. She raised the crowbar. The first swing barely marked it. The crowbar came down against the lock housing, and the door gave back nothing but sound. A flat, hard ring that traveled the length of the narrow hallway and bounced off the thin walls of the motorhome and went out through the metal skin of the vehicle into the wet October night. Riley's hands stung from the vibration. Her grip slipped half an inch. She reset her feet on the linoleum, widened her stance, and thought about her father in July of 2017, sitting in Owen's service bay, drinking a beer with his best friend, knowing that the time remaining to him was finite and choosing to spend it on her. She swung again. This time the door spoke back. A small dent appeared near the lock just below the keyhole, and a chip of gray paint broke free and floated to the linoleum floor. She kept going. She did not count the strikes, and she did not pace herself, and she did not think about the blisters forming on her palms, or the way the muscles in her shoulders were beginning to burn with the specific fire of work they had not been asked to do before. She drove the crowbar into the lock the way her father had once shown her how to drive a nail, not with the wrist, not with the arm alone, but with the whole body behind it, the weight dropping through the shoulder and the elbow and into the grip all at once, the full commitment of it. The lock cracked on the 17th swing. It was a small sound, dry and precise like a pencil breaking cleanly in two. The door shuddered in its frame. Something internal gave way with a mechanical finality. A pin released a mechanism stripped past the point of recovery, and Riley set the crowbar against the hallway wall and pressed her palm flat against the cold gray metal and pushed. The door swung inward. Cold air rushed out past her shoulders into the hallway, traveling the length of the motorhome toward the dinette. Not stale air, not the flat, compressed air of a sealed room that has been forgotten. This was air that had been kept cold deliberately, the kind of cold that comes from insulation and intention, from a space built to preserve something across years. It moved past her like a held breath finally released, and in it, she caught something faint and specific: cedar. Old paper. The ghost of a man's presence, 9 years attenuated but still present, still there in some frequency below conscious perception, recognizable not by the mind but by the body. She stepped inside. The space was small, 4 feet wide, maybe 6 feet deep. A hidden compartment built into the rear of the motorhome where the original spare tank housing had been gutted and rebuilt with purpose. The walls were lined with foam insulation panels, cream-colored, and fitted precisely at the corners. The floor was steel plate cold under her feet, even through the soles of her sneakers. And then the light came on a small LED panel mounted to the ceiling on a motion sensor, flooding the compartment with clean white light that made everything in it sharply immediately visible. Riley stood in the doorway and took in what she was looking at. 3 walls lined with narrow shelves built from plywood and finished with the careful attention of a man who builds things the right way, even when no one will ever see them. On the shelves, a row of 3-ring binders with their spines labeled in her father's handwriting, small and precise and slightly tilted, exactly the handwriting she had been tracing on the backs of envelopes since she was 9 years old. A row of small metal cases, each the size of a hardback book, each with a latching lid. A stack of manila folders bound with wide rubber bands. A row of audio cassette tapes in clear plastic sleeves, each one labeled in the same hand. A laptop computer approximately 10 years old, its charging cord wound neatly and secured with a twist tie. A handheld digital camera with a memory card still seated in the slot. A spiral-bound notebook, its cover water-stained but intact, filled from front to back. And on the wall directly opposite the door at eye level, in a plain black frame, screwed directly into the foam insulation, a photograph. It was her. She was 9 years old, standing in front of a Christmas tree in the living room of the house on Alcott Street, holding up a drawing she had made crayon on construction paper. A house with a triangle roof and 4 windows, and a door that occupied most of the front wall. The drawing of a child who understands what a house is supposed to contain even before she understands the geometry of walls. She was smiling the way children smile before they learn to perform smiling for cameras, which is to say she was not smiling at the camera at all, but at whoever had just said something to her from behind it. Her whole face was in the smile. Her eyes were completely unconditionally open. She did not remember the moment. She did not remember the Christmas or the drawing or the afternoon. But she knew exactly who had been behind the camera because she knew the quality of the smile on her own face, She had seen it nowhere since that afternoon and would not see it again until much later. And she knew it was the smile she had only ever made for him. Below the photograph, fixed to the foam insulation with two strips of tape yellowed at the edges from 9 years of cold storage, was a folded sheet of paper. Her name was written on the outside in her father's hand. Not Charlotte, not Riley Crane, just Riley. Her name in his pen in the space where the air had been cold for 9 years. She crossed the small space in 2 steps. She took the paper from the wall with both hands. She unfolded it. The paper had the texture of something that has been handled many times, folded and unfolded, read and reconsidered by the man who wrote it before he put it here. The ink was dark and had not faded. He had used a good pen, a pen worth using for something that needed to last. She read, Riley, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I am sorry. I want you to know that I tried to make it otherwise. I tried for longer than I should have, and I am sorry that in the end I failed to come back, and I am sorry for everything that failure has cost you in the years between when I left and the moment you are reading these words. You deserve better than what I left you with. I need you to know that I understood that while it was happening and carried it as a weight I could not set down. I worked for a company called Vantage Defense Solutions. I started there in 2008 in good faith as an engineer who believed he was building things that would protect people. I was wrong about what I was building, and I was wrong about the man I was building it for. The project was called Iron Gate. We told the Department of Defense it was a guidance and targeting integration system for defensive platforms. That description was accurate in 2008. By 2015, it was no longer accurate, and by 2016, it was a lie. And by the time I understood completely what it had become, I was already too deep inside it to walk away without leaving something behind that could do what walking away alone could not do. My friend and CEO, a man named Cole Sayer, arranged to sell the Iron Gate technology to private foreign buyers. He did not sell it to our enemies in any traditional sense. Sayer was too intelligent and too careful for something that obvious. He sold it to private interests who could pay, who would use it in ways that were not our government's business and not our military's oversight, and not subject to any accountability that Sayer did not personally control. He lied to his engineers, to his government, to his country, to everyone around him about what was being built and what was being done with it. He did it quietly and over years, and with the particular smooth confidence of a man who has decided that the ordinary rules do not apply to him and has not yet been shown otherwise. In the spring of 2017, I brought what I had gathered to a journalist named Frank Dolan. Frank is a good man and a careful one. We worked together for 3 months. Then in August of 2017, I learned that Sayer knew what I was doing. He had known for some time. He had been watching me decide what to do while he decided what to do about me. He is a very patient man. He waited until he was certain before moving. That patience is both his greatest strength and the reason this room exists. He gave me just enough time to do what needed to be done before he moved. In August of 2017, I disappeared. I arranged for it carefully. The accident on Route 12 in February of 2018, the truck, the fire, the bend in the road was not real. I was not in that truck. I had a plan, and for a time the plan was working, and I believed that I was going to finish what I had started and find a way to come back to you. Something went wrong. If you are reading this, then I did not come back. That means they found me before I could finish. That means the plan was not enough. I am sorry, Riley. Those are the most inadequate words I know, and I am using them anyway because they are true, and I have nothing better. In the lockbox on the bottom shelf, there is a digital audio recorder. The recording on it is a conversation between Cole Sayer and 2 foreign procurement representatives recorded in August of 2017 at a hotel in Portland, Oregon. I was present for that conversation in a capacity Sayer did not know about. The recording on that device is the most important thing I have ever made. Take it to Frank Dolan. He will know exactly what to do with it and exactly who needs to hear it. The binders on the upper shelf contain 9 years of documentation. Contracts, internal communications, financial records, technical specifications, everything that Frank needs to finish the story, and everything that a federal investigator would need to build a complete case. Do not remove these from the motorhome until Frank tells you it is safe to do so. There is a notebook on the middle shelf. On the 3rd page, underlined in red ink, is the name and contact information for a person at the FBI field office in Seattle who has the background and the authority to act on what the recorder contains. Tell her the project name first. Everything else will follow from that. I love you, Riley. I have loved you every day of your life and every day since August of 2017, when I walked away from mine in order to keep yours intact. You have been 9 years old in my heart since the last morning I stood in the doorway of your room and watched you sleep before I left. And the price on the motorhome is what Owen will tell you it means. And I hope that when you hear it, you will understand that leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever done, and the only thing that kept you safe while I tried to finish what I had started, and that I am sorry I could not finish it, and I am sorry I could not come home. Bring him down, then live your life. The second part is the more important instruction, Riley. Do not forget the second part. Bring Cole Sayer down and then live your life the full length and the full width of it all the way to the edges. That is what I have wanted for you since the day you were born. That is what I still want for you across whatever distance exists between where I am and where you are standing right now reading this. Your father, Eli. Riley read the letter 3 times. She read it standing up with her free hand pressed against the foam insulation of the wall to keep herself oriented in the small space, because the floor had become uncertain under her feet in the way that floors become uncertain when the full weight of a thing finally settles into you at once. She read it until the words blurred at the edges and she had to stop and press the heel of her hand against her closed eyes and breathe through the constriction in her chest. That was not grief, exactly. Grief was something she already carried and knew the shape of, but something larger and more complicated than grief. Something that was grief and relief and love and fury, and the particular ache of a thing that has been incomplete for 8 years, finally in this moment becoming complete. She folded the letter back along its original creases and put it in the inside pocket of her hoodie against her chest next to the photograph. She could feel both of them there pressed against her sternum between the cotton and her ribs. The old photograph and the new letter. Her father's 2 communications to her, one made when she was 9 and one made when she was about to stop being 9, held against the same body now all these years later. She pressed her hand flat over the pocket for a moment and held it there. Then she knelt on the steel plate floor. The lockbox was on the bottom shelf exactly where he had said. The size of a lunchbox, gunmetal gray fireproof with a combination lock built into the front of the lid. 3 digits. She did not need to think about it at all. 9. Her age when he left. 1. The one child he had. 7. For 2017, the year he had built all of this and put it in Owen's hands and walked away. She turned the dials one position at a time. The mechanism released with a clean, definitive click. Inside the box, resting in a bed of black foam that had been cut to its precise dimensions, was a digital audio recorder. Small, black. The model that was current approximately 9 or 10 years ago, solid, and built for durability rather than elegance. A USB charging cable was coiled beside it, neatly tied with a small rubber band. She pressed the power button. The screen lit up pale blue in the cold white light of the compartment. One file in the menu. The file name was a date, February 4th, 2018, the day before his truck was found burned on the bend of Route 12. She stood there holding the recorder in both hands, and she understood what that date meant. On February 4th, 2018, her father had known that the following day was going to be his last day, or close enough to his last day that the distinction between the two no longer mattered, and he had sat somewhere alone and made one final thing before the end of it. The last thing he made was this. The last thing he chose to do, with the time remaining to him, was to make this recording. She did not press play. She was not going to press play. She was going to carry this recorder exactly as it was unchanged to Frank Dolan in the morning, exactly as her father had asked her to, because her father had asked her to, and that was the only reason she needed. She put the recorder carefully back into its foam housing. She closed the lockbox. She turned the combination lock. She stood up. She looked around this compartment one final time. She took the notebook from the middle shelf and opened it to the 3rd page. The name underlined in red ink, Agent Mara Pruitt. Below it, a phone number with a Seattle area code. Below that, in her father's precise handwriting, Seattle Field Office. Knows defense procurement chain inside and out. Does not know Iron Gate yet by name. Tell her the project name first. Everything else will follow from there. She put the notebook back exactly where she had found it. She looked at the photograph on the wall one more time. The 9-year-old girl with the crayon drawing of a house smiling at someone behind the camera with her whole face open. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went back to the dinette. She sat down on the bench seat. She put the lockbox on the table in front of her. She put the photograph, her father's photograph of the two of them, the one that lived in her pocket, face up on the table beside the lockbox. She looked at both of them. She said, "I found it, Dad." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I'm going to finish it." She slept 4 hours. She woke before dawn with the particular clarity that arrives after you have cried yourself empty and slept on the other side of it, a clarity that has nothing soft in it, only the hard, clean edges of what needs to happen next. She washed her face with bottled water. She braided her hair back. She put the lockbox in the bottom of her backpack. She was at Frank Dolan's cabin at 6:15 in the morning. He opened the door before she knocked. He was dressed. He had coffee on. He looked at her face and then at the backpack, and he nodded once. "Come in, Miss Crane." She came in. She set the lockbox on his kitchen table and unlocked it and took out the recorder. She told him what was on it. She told him the date of the file. Frank sat down at the table across from her and looked at the recorder sitting on his kitchen table. He did not touch it. He looked at it the way a man looks at the thing he has been chasing for years when it has finally come to rest in front of him and become real. Then he stood. He crossed to the roll-top desk in the corner of his living room and unlocked it, and from the back of the middle drawer took a cell phone that was not the cell phone she had seen him with the day before. He powered it on. He scrolled to a number. He dialed. When the call connected, he said, "It's the matter we spoke about in 2020. It's happened. I have what we need. I need you in Ironvale today." He listened. Today, he said again with the flat, unhurried certainty of a man who has been waiting to say this for 6 years. "Not tomorrow. Drive, don't fly. Be at the cabin before dark." He hung up. He turned to Riley. "That was Agent Mara Pruitt," he said, "FBI Seattle Field Office. She has been trying to build a case against Vantage Defense Solutions for 6 years. She thought she was going to retire without it. She's going to retire because of it," Riley said. Frank looked at her steadily for a moment. "Yes," he said, "she is." He made a copy of the audio file before anything else, running the recorder through his laptop to a thumb drive that he sealed in an envelope and addressed by hand to a law office in Portland. Then he walked Riley through what was going to happen and what her role in it was going to be. "Your job for the next 12 hours, he said, "is to be a 17-year-old girl who has a job at a diner. You go to the Blue Anchor. You work. You eat what Bet gives you. You do not carry the recorder, it stays here. You do not tell anyone what you found or where you found it. You come back here at 6 o'clock this evening. Not before, not after." "Yes, sir." He held her gaze. "If anyone approaches you today that you do not know anyone at all, a man in a suit, someone asking questions, a car that slows down, you walk into the nearest place that has people in it, and you do not leave until they are gone. Do you understand?" "Yes." He looked at her for another moment. "Your father would be proud of you, Miss Crane." She looked back at him. "He'd better be," she said. "I just spent the night reading the only 2 letters from him I'm ever going to get." Frank Dolan smiled. A small, specific smile. The smile of a man who has been in the company of hard things for long enough to recognize the exact quality of bravery when he is standing next to it. "Go," he said. She went. She walked to the Blue Anchor. She tied on an apron. She washed dishes for 7 straight hours with the focused internal intentionality of a person whose hands need to be occupied so that the rest of her can do something that cannot be done out loud. Betty did not ask questions. Bet had the particular wisdom of a woman who has spent 4 decades feeding people through hard things and knows from long experience the precise difference between a person who needs to talk and a person who needs to work. She left Riley alone with the hot water and the dish rack and the steady rhythm of plates going in dirty and coming out clean, the satisfaction of a thing that can actually be made right. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the bell above the Blue Anchor's door sounded. Riley looked up from the sink. The man who walked in was wearing a charcoal overcoat cut precisely for his specific frame, the kind of garment that announces without announcing that money is not a constraint. He was 47 years old. dark-haired, lean through the jaw and the neck, moving through the diner in the unhurried manner of a man who has never entered a room that did not in some functional sense belong to him. He sat down at the counter 3 stools from where Riley was standing. He looked at the menu. He had a small crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow, faint and old. She knew the scar. She had seen it in the photograph she had found between pages of documentation in the motorhome. Her father and this man standing in front of a building still under construction. Both of them in hard hats. Both of them approximately 35 years old. Both of them smiling the confident, uncomplicated smiles of men who believe they are building something that matters. Cole Sayer ordered black coffee in the pleasant, unremarkable voice of a man who has been polite to service staff his entire life without it meaning anything in either direction. He drank half the cup. Then he turned his head a precise quarter turn and looked at Riley. "Miss Crane," he said. The plate in Riley's hands went into the rack because she had very good hands and had made a decision sometime in the previous 12 hours about exactly who she was going to be in this moment and how she was going to be it. She set the dish towel on the counter. She turned to face him. She said nothing. He looked at her with an expression that was not cold and was not warm, and was something more precise than either the expression of a man who has prepared for a conversation and is finding now that it is actually occurring, that the preparation was both sufficient and somehow beside the point. "I'd like to talk with you for a few minutes," he said, "if you're willing." Riley looked at Bet. Bet's eyes had gone still and very specific, a woman calculating in real time. She gave Riley a nod so small it was barely a movement, the nod that said, "You are not alone. I am 6 feet from the telephone, and there is a baseball bat under this counter that your father told me 9 years ago to keep there for exactly this kind of situation." "5 minutes," Riley said. He took his coffee to the corner booth. She slid in across from him. The vinyl was cool under her hands. The fluorescent light above held steady. He said, "My name is Cole Sayer. I know who you are. I thought you might." He set the coffee cup down and folded his hands on the table in the visible, deliberate way of a man who wants to be clear that his hands have nothing in them. He said, "Your father was a brilliant engineer, the best I've ever worked with in 30 years in this industry. He was also in the last year of his life a man who had become convinced of certain things about our work that were not accurate. He removed materials from the company. He was preparing to go public with statements that would have caused serious harm to a great many people who had nothing whatsoever to do with whatever he believed he had found." Riley said nothing. "His death was an accident," Sayer said. "I want you to know that. I was devastated by it. He was my friend. I think about him regularly, and I mean that without qualification." She kept her eyes on him, steady, saying nothing. He reached into his overcoat and produced a long white envelope and placed it on the table between them. He set it down without pushing it toward her, offered not pressed. "There is a check inside that envelope," he said. "It is written to you, Riley Crane. The amount is $2 million. It will clear at any bank in this state. There are no conditions attached to it, no paperwork, no signature required. I am simply doing what your father, had he lived, would have wanted someone to do for his daughter." Riley looked at the envelope. She thought about what $2 million meant to a 17-year-old girl with $8 in her pocket. She thought about it honestly and without self-congratulation, the way an honest person thinks about money when money is what is in front of them. She thought about a house. She thought about her mother. She thought about college and the things that come after college. She thought about all of it clearly for approximately 4 seconds. Then she thought about a recording made on February 4th, 2018, by a man who knew it was going to be his last full day, and she was done thinking about the money. She looked up. She said, "How did you know I'd been to see Frank Dolan?" Something moved very slightly in Sayer's expression. Just below the surface, a small and controlled recalibration. "I beg your pardon," he said. "You knew I went to Frank," she said. "You knew it before you walked in here. The only person who knew I went to Frank was Grant Holt." She let that sit for one beat. "He's been reporting to you since 2017, hasn't he?" "Since right after my father disappeared." Sayer said, "Miss Crane, you put him in that house," she said. Her voice was level. Not because she was not angry. She was angry in a way that had mass to it, that she could feel in her chest and in the backs of her hands. But because level was the right instrument for this conversation, and she had decided that in advance. "You put him in my mother's house because you needed someone inside that family. Someone who would know if I ever got old enough to start asking the wrong questions. She looked at him steadily. 9 years of payments. 9 years of a man sitting at my mother's table. 9 years of our family being a surveillance operation. And you're offering me $2 million. Sayer said, "Whatever you believe you have, I have the recording," she said. The silence that came after those 5 words was the most complete silence Riley had ever been inside. Cole Sayer went very still, not the controlled stillness of a careful man managing a difficult conversation. A different kind of still, the stillness of a man who has just heard a specific combination of words that rearranges everything he understood about the room he is sitting in. A stillness that was involuntary, which was the only involuntary thing she had seen from him. "The recording," he said, very quietly. "Portland," she said. "August 2017, a hotel conference room. You and 2 buyers." She watched his eyes as she said it. "My father was in that room. You didn't know he was there. But he was, and he had a recorder, and everything that was said in that room is on it. And it has been in the back of a motorhome in this town for 9 years, and this morning I put it in Frank Dolan's hands." Cole Sayer looked at her across the table. He looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of a man computing in real time the full shape of what has been built against him, and arriving with the methodical precision of a man accustomed to assessing situations completely at the understanding that it is finished. That the angle he would normally find in this situation does not exist. That a 17-year-old girl sitting across from him in a corner booth of a small-town diner has, over the course of 48 hours, done what 30-year careers in federal investigations and all the patience of all the careful people who had been trying for years had not been able to do. She said, "Why $9, Mr. Sayer?" He looked at her. "My father set the price 9 years ago," she said. "He told his best friend to wait for me and to sell it to me for $9 when I came." 9. My age when he left. He built a plan for a 9-year-old girl and trusted her to grow into it. She picked up the white envelope from the table and held it out to him. "He trusted me specifically, and I'm not for sale." Cole Sayer looked at the envelope. He looked at her face. He looked at the envelope again. For one moment, just one brief and unguarded, the surface of him fell away entirely. And what was underneath was simply a man who had spent 30 years telling himself that he was too intelligent to be caught finding out in this specific moment that he had been wrong about that for the last 9 years, and that the thing that had undone him was a number that a dead man had written on a piece of cardboard. Then the surface came back. He was himself again, composed, controlled, the face of a man who has nothing more to prove to anyone in the room because the room is already decided. He did not reach for the envelope. The bell above the Blue Anchor's door sounded. Frank Dolan came through the door first, moving with the focused forward energy of a man who has set something in motion and is here to be present when it arrives. Behind him came a woman approximately 58 years old with gray hair cut short and practical in a navy windbreaker over dark clothing. The kind of unremarkable outfit that becomes remarkable only when you notice how precisely the person wearing it moves the economy of motion, the specific physical composure of decades of professional training. Behind her came 4 people in 2 configurations, 2 in plain clothes and 2 in dark jackets with 3 white letters across the back. Agent Mara Pruitt stopped at the corner booth. She looked down at Cole Sayer with the settled, unhurried calm of a woman who has been working toward this exact moment for 6 years and has nothing left to prove, and nowhere else she would rather be. "Mr. Sayer," she said, "my name is Agent Mara Pruitt, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have a warrant for your arrest. The charges include conspiracy to commit murder, illegal export of controlled defense technology, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. Please stand and place your hands flat on the table." Cole Sayer did not move immediately. He looked across the table at Riley Crane one more time. He looked at her for one long moment, and in that moment, whatever remained of the composed and managed surface he had maintained for the entirety of their conversation was finally completely gone. And what was underneath it in this last unguarded second was the expression of a man who built his life on the certainty that he was the most intelligent person in any room. He entered facing the fact that for 9 years he had been wrong about that, and that the room that had finally undone him was a corner booth in a small diner in a small dying town, and that the person sitting across from him was a girl who had been 9 years old when her father decided to trust her with everything. Then his face went smooth and still and composed for the last time. He stood, He placed his hands flat on the table. The agents moved in with the practiced efficiency of people for whom this is a procedure rather than an event. They cuffed him. They read him his rights in the quiet, level monotone of complete professionalism. They walked him through the diner, past the trucker at the back, who looked up from his phone, past the young woman at the window table with a sleeping toddler in her lap, past the counter where Bet Tanner stood with one hand pressed over her heart. At the door, Sayer stopped. He turned his head and looked back at Riley one final time. He said nothing. He was at the last a man who understood that there was nothing left to say. Riley said nothing either. They walked him out. The door swung closed behind them. The bell above it rang once clean and small and then was still. The Blue Anchor diner returned slowly to itself. The toddler stirred in her mother's arms. The trucker went back to his phone. The coffee maker behind the counter cycled through its next cycle. Bet set down what she was holding. She walked around the counter and across the diner floor, and she sat down in the booth beside Riley. She put her arm around Riley's shoulders, and she did not say anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said. And Bet Tanner had long since learned the difference between the moments that required words and the moments that required only presence. Riley put her head down on Bet Tanner's shoulder. She cried again, but differently than she had cried in Owen's service bay. That crying had been the grief of a daughter for a father ancient and specific and accumulated across 8 years of not being able to do it. This was something else. This was the crying of a person who has been carrying a weight they did not fully know they were carrying, setting it down, and discovering in the moment of setting it down the complete truth of how heavy it has been. This was relief and exhaustion, and the profound settling ache of something completed, a task finished and handed to the people who would carry it the rest of the way, a thing that could not now be undone or taken back. Bet held her through all of it, warm and steady, and without any hurry whatsoever. Outside the window of the Blue Anchor, the October afternoon had gone to the particular gray of a day that has decided to end early. Leaves came off the maple at the corner of Main and 2nd in the wind from the west and rolled along the wet sidewalk and accumulated at the base of the streetlight that was just now coming on amber and patient in the early dark. The investigation moved the way federal investigations move, with the grinding, methodical thoroughness of a process that is not interested in speed, because it is interested in completeness, in building something that cannot be undone by any appeal or any oversight, in making the structure of the case so solid and so complete that the only thing left for the justice system to do is read it. Vantage Defense Solutions was raided 6 days after the arrest at the Blue Anchor. 11 banker boxes of documentation came out of the hidden compartment in the motorhome in Owen Marsh's lot, cataloged and inventoried by people whose job it was to know exactly what they were looking at. The digital recording from February 4, 2018 was authenticated by forensic audio specialists within 72 hours of its submission and became the architectural center of the federal case against Cole Sayer and the 3 other executives who were ultimately charged. 2 foreign procurement brokers, one in Zurich, one in Singapore, were arrested within 30 days, their extraditions proceeding through the appropriate channels at the appropriate pace. 3 senior Vantage executives accepted plea agreements within the first 2 months. The Department of Defense issued a statement that was written in the careful, bloodless prose of institutional accountability, the kind of prose that acknowledges everything and explains nothing and satisfies no one, which is precisely what it was designed to do. Cole Sayer did not stand trial. He died in a federal holding facility in Seattle in December, 6 weeks after his arrest. The medical examiner's official ruling was cardiac arrest, natural causes. Frank Dolan told Riley about it on the porch of his cabin 2 days after the news reached them, sitting in the rocking chairs looking out at the gray winter lake, his coffee going cold on the railing beside him. "I don't believe the ruling," he said, "and I want you to consider very carefully whether you need to." She sat with that. "Some doors," Frank said, "are open, some are closed. Your father asked you to do 2 things. Bring Cole Sayer down, then live your life." He paused. "The man is down, Miss Crane. The first part is done. Now go do the second part." She let that door close. Grant Holt was arrested in the 4th week of the investigation when federal forensic accountants tracing the financial architecture of Vantage Defense's operational history found a series of payments running from an offshore shell company registered in the Cayman Islands to a personal bank account in Grant Holt's name that had never appeared on any tax filing or financial disclosure. The payments had begun in September of 2017, 1 month after Eli Warwick disappeared, 1 month after the decision had apparently been made to manage the situation through other means, and they had continued without interruption for 9 years, the last one arriving 6 days before the arrest at the Blue Anchor. Grant Holt took a plea agreement. He served 14 months at a federal correctional facility. When he was released, he did not return to Ironvale. He did not return to the house on Alcott Street. He did not return to anything that had previously been his, because by the time he was released, the category of things that had previously been his had been substantially revised by the federal government, and what remained of it was not in Ironvale. Donna Crane filed for divorce the same day the federal investigators came to her door. She did not contest anything. She did not ask for anything. She signed her name back to what it had been before Donna Crane, and that was who she was again from that day forward. She moved out of the house on Alcott Street and into a small apartment on the north side of town, a one-bedroom with good windows and a kitchen. She was making her own, and she began in the careful, tentative way of a person who has been someone else's project for too long to remember what it was like to be simply herself. She came to the Blue Anchor on a Tuesday morning in March. Riley was wiping down the counter in the lull between the early breakfast rush and the mid-morning regulars. She heard the bell above the door. She looked up. Her mother was standing in the doorway. She was wearing a blue wool coat that Riley had never seen before, her own purchase, chosen for herself, belonging to no one else's wardrobe or taste or preference. She was holding a small paper bag in both hands. She had lost weight over the winter in the way that people lose weight when something heavy they have been carrying has been removed not from illness, but from the simple mechanics of a burden lifted. Her face had a quality Riley could not immediately name, and then could. It was the quality of a face that has stopped bracing. The subtle structural difference between a face that is holding itself against something and a face that has finally let itself simply be. They looked at each other across the length of the empty diner. Neither of them moved. There was no rush. There was for once no urgency anywhere in this moment, nothing pressing on it from the outside. Then Riley set the dish rag on the counter. She walked around the end of the counter. She walked the length of the diner floor, past the booths and the stools, past the photographs on the walls of Ironvale in better decades, and she stopped 2 feet from her mother. Donna Crane set the paper bag on the nearest table without looking away from her daughter's face and opened her arms. Riley walked into them. She was taller than her mother now and had been for almost a year. She had to bend slightly, and her mother had to reach slightly, and they made the small, wordless adjustment between them without either of them needing to address it. The adjustment that comes naturally when you know someone's body well enough to know its geometry, even after time has changed the proportions. Donna cried into Riley's hair. Riley cried into the shoulder of the blue coat that smelled of a perfume she did not recognize, which meant it was Donna's own choice, which was the best thing that smell could have told her. Bet Tanner stood in the kitchen doorway with one hand over her mouth and the other hand resting at her side, in the posture of a woman who has been watching things happen across the space of her diner for 40 years and has not yet, after all of it, stopped being moved by the ones that matter. The bell above the Blue Anchor's door swayed once in a cold draft from somewhere and then went still. They stood there in the doorway for a long time. They did not need to say anything. They were the same blood, and they knew each other's silences, and this particular silence was one that neither of them had any need to fill. In May, Owen Marsh signed a document at his kitchen table that transferred the title of one 1989 motorhome vehicle identification number on file from Owen Marsh to Riley Crane of Ironvale, Oregon. Price of sale entered in the designated field in Owen's careful, slightly arthritic handwriting, $9. He slid the title across the table to her. Before she responded, before she gave him what she had brought to give him, he looked up at her with the expression of a man who has been carrying a particular set of words for 9 years and has finally been given the moment and the permission to say them. He said, "He told me to tell you this when the time was right." He said, "When she comes, Owen, the price is 9, not 8, not 10, 9. He said, she will be the same girl she was when I left her on the inside. And that is the girl I need to walk through that door." He set his hands flat on the table. "He was not selling you a motorhome," Owen said. "The motorhome is beside the point. He was telling you something that he could not tell you any other way, that you had not changed in his eyes, that you were still exactly the person he had left, which was the person he loved, which was the only person in the world. He needed to be the one to walk through that door and do what he could not finish. Riley sat across from him for a moment without speaking. Then she slid a small box across the table toward him. It was wrapped in brown paper, plain, the way her father had always wrapped things efficiently, without embellishment. Inside the box was her father's watch. She had found it on the second shelf of the hidden compartment in the back corner of a manila envelope, exactly preserved the crystal. Uncracked, the hand stopped at the time he had last wound it before he left it here. In August of 2017, when he had put everything he had into this room and locked the door and given the key to his best friend and walked away. Owen took the box and opened it and sat looking at the watch in his open palms for a very long time. He did not put it on. He did not wind it. He sat with it held in both hands in the kitchen of the house where he had lived alone since his father died, and he was quiet for long enough that the quiet became something full rather than empty. "I'll wear it on Tuesdays," he said finally. His voice was rough at the edges. "He liked Tuesdays," Riley said. Owen nodded. "He did." He looked at the watch in his hands one more time. Then he looked up at her. "He'd be proud of you," he said. She held his gaze. "You keep telling me that," she said. Owen nodded again once and slow. "Somebody has to," he said, "since he can't." On a Saturday morning in June, she drove the motor home out of Owen Marsh's lot for the last time. The new tires he had put on in April made a clean, steady sound on the asphalt. Not the old labored sound of rubber that has been compressed too long in one position, but the sound of something that has been maintained and renewed and is now being used for the purpose it was made for. The engine ran smoothly and consistently, the sound of an engine that has been serviced properly and recently by a man who knows engines the way other men know languages fluently and without translation. The cracked window on the passenger side had been replaced with clean new glass. The interior had been cleared and cleaned. All 47 years of accumulated material removed the hidden compartment, stripped of everything that had needed to live in it. Its shelves now empty and its walls now just insulation rather than evidence. The gray door removed from its frame entirely. Nothing left behind the opening now but a small, clean storage space with a motion-sensing light and a row of empty wooden shelves. Nothing to hide, nothing that needed to be hidden. Donna was in the passenger seat with a paper road atlas open across her knees. The old kind bought at a gas station, the kind that has been replaced by the technology in the pocket of everyone who owns a phone, but that Riley had asked for specifically because this trip was not going to be navigated by a voice telling them where to turn. Donna had not asked why. She had simply gone to the hardware store on Main Street and found the atlas in the back of the display rack and brought it home and marked their starting point with a small pencil dot. The Cascade Range rose ahead of them through the windshield. The mountains were still holding snow at the high elevations, the peaks bright, in particular against the blue of the June sky, the lower slopes running green in every shade of green that exists, which in Oregon in June is a considerable number of shades. The road ran east out of Ironvale toward the pass, and the morning was clear in the way that June mornings in the Cascades are clear when they decide to be clear, which is completely and without reservation, the light coming off the high snow and filling the air below it with something that was almost the same color as gold, but more patient, more diffuse, more inclined to stay. Donna looked at the mountains for a while. Then she looked at her daughter. "Where are we going, Riley?" she said. Her voice was quiet and genuinely curious, the voice of a person asking a real question rather than a ritual one. Riley kept both hands on the wheel. She thought about her father kneeling at a workbench with his hand on a 9-year-old shoulder, both of them squinting in autumn light. She thought about a man who couldn't eat his eggs over easy on a Tuesday morning because he had already decided what he was going to do and was using the time he had left. She thought about a small LED light coming on in a hidden room and a photograph of a girl on the wall and a letter that began, "Riley, if you are reading this." She thought about the last line of that letter. "Bring him down, then live your life," all the way to the edges of it. She thought about being 9 years old in the photograph on the wall, smiling the smile she had only ever smiled for him. Somewhere Dad would have liked, she said. Donna was quiet for a moment. The road climbed toward the pass. The light ahead of them was very clear and very steady. "He would have liked anywhere with us in it," Donna said. Her voice was soft and certain in the way that things are certain when they have been true for a very long time and have only recently been given back the freedom to be said out loud. It was the voice of a woman who had been someone else's version of herself for 9 years and was in this moment on this road with the Cascades ahead of her and her daughter beside her, becoming simply herself again. Riley pressed the accelerator. The motorhome moved forward into the morning light. The road ahead was long and open and belonged entirely to the two of them, and the mountains rose ahead of them, blue and white and patient, and she drove.